Hello, crafty friends, and welcome back to my channel. Wishing you all a very happy new year. Let's begin 2025 by spreading some happy sunshine to all you lovely people. Well, being close to nature has always given me so much happiness, so I thought why not share this with you guys by creating a beautiful mountains and foresty scene and sending you all some sunshine at the start of this very happy new year. Before we get started, I would really like to thank each and every one of you for being here today and supporting my channel. If you're new to my channel, thanks for being here. My name is Revati and I create quick and simple card making tutorials here on my channel. I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and don't forget to hit that bell icon so that you get notified every time I post a new video. Now let us get started and take a look at the very first card that I created for 2025. I will be creating a quick and simple yet colorful background using the layered mountains and tree-line stencils by Cat Scrappiness. Now this is a 6 by 6 inch stencil which has 3 layers to create stunning layered mountain scene and along with a beautiful tree-line detail. Now this would be perfect for nature inspired or any adventure themed projects. The layering on these stencils allow you to add dimension and perspective to your background. I will be ink blending using these stencils, which not only create the tree line but also have masks to create multiple layers of those tree lines. You could add some fun stamped focal point image to complete your scene. Now, since there's a lot of masking and ink blending, I want to make sure that my panel does not move or shift around. For that, I will use the sticky mat, which will not only hold my panel in place, but is also perfect to hold my stencil, making sure that the ink does not bleed into areas where I don't need it to. I positioned my white A2 size panel onto the center of the sticky mat and then layered the first tree line stencil towards the bottom half of this panel. This will be the first tree line layer for which I used the darkest green that I had in my stash. Once I was done ink blending, I carefully removed the stencil. On the other side of the panel is the mask of this layer. I carefully layered this onto the tree line, making sure that I have covered all of that blended area. And then I added the second layer of the tree line right above it. Then, using the lighter shade of green, I blended onto the second layer. Well, now since the first layer had a darker green, you could avoid the mask and directly blend over it. It would not have had a lot of effect or change in color. I feel that using the combination of a light and dark green gives some dimension and depth to these tree lines. Now, once I'm done ink blending the lighter green, I will remove both of the stencils and using either one of those tree lines, you could fill in the gaps between those tree lines. All I wanted to do is make sure that there's no white space between them. If you see any of those white spaces, you could just bring your blending brush and light-handedly blend around those areas with all that leftover green on the brush. You don't need to dip your ink blending brush again into the ink pad. If you want to create more tree lines above this, just make sure that you use lighter shades of green or just use the leftover ink on the blending brush. Next, we will create the mountain layer for our background scene. Now, since I will be using the browns for my mountain, I will definitely mask to cover those tree lines. Well, since I ink blended a couple of trees over the last layer, I will not have a perfect mask here. So instead of masking the tree line, I will ink it very carefully, making sure that the brown on the mountains does not mix with the green on my tree lines. I used two shades of browns for my mountains. I pulled down the lighter shade towards the tree lines and used the darker brown just towards the edges of the mountain. Once I was satisfied with the ink blending on the mountain, I will take out the stencil and place the mask over it. This will help us with ink blending blue on our sky. Now note that the blue is a very lighter shade as compared to the heavy-handed brown that we used on the mountain. So it's important not to get these colors mixed. Initially, I thought that I would just add the blue sky, but it was not until later into this project that I thought of adding the sub-sentiment which says sending sunshine. So to match the sentiment, I decided to add the sun behind my mountain. I used yellow for the sun and carefully blended the blue on my sky, making sure that the blue does not bleed into the yellow sun. I can now pull out this mask, and before we go into the next step, I will make sure that I'm satisfied with all of that ink blending on my tree lines, the mountains, the blue sky, and the sun behind the mountains. Well, as I peel the stencil, I realize that there's a slight white marking left between the sky and the mountain. Well, this definitely is an imperfection, but let's just see this as a snow peak mountain. Well, you could leave the panel as is, but if you know me, you know how much I love my sparkle. I took out my splat box and placed the panel into this box and sprayed some silver shimmer mist all over the panel. Now, while this panel dries, we will work on our sentiment. For my sentiment, I will be using the simple sentiment stamp and die set combo. Now, I will be using the tiny sentiments from the simple sentiment all occasion stamp set. Now, this is a universal die set that cuts out sentiments from these simple sentiment stamps. Cat Scrappiness has these in a bunch of different occasions, including Valentine's, Halloween, and the latest being the holiday edition. The die cuts out all of these sentiments beautifully. I usually stamp a bunch of these sentiments on a white piece of cardstock using black ink and cut them out using the coordinating die and store all of them together in a tray. That way, I always have my sentiment strips ready to go for my card projects. This is one set that I would definitely recommend all of my crafty friends to have. All you need to buy is one die set that will go with a bunch of different sentiment stamps. You will see that all of these sentiments can be used for so many different occasions. This is a very versatile product that I feel is a must in your crafty stash. Now that our background panel is dry and the sentiment picked out, it is now time to assemble our card front. Now, I wanted to keep this as simple as I could with very little dimension. I decided to add some liquid glue onto this background panel and stick it right onto a top folding A2 size card base. Well, if you notice carefully, I did add a bit of orange to the center of the sun just to give some dimension and depth to it, just like we gave some dimension using various shades of green for our tree line. Once my panel was in place, I went ahead and stuck the sentiment strips. Now I use some foam tape to stick these sentiments. I first have the sending you sunshine and I stuck that using some liquid glue. Liquid glue over foam tape gives you some wiggle room just to make sure that these sentiments are first properly aligned before they finally get fixed onto your card front. I like to use my T-square ruler just to make sure that these sentiments are properly aligned. Here's a look at the finished card. I love how quick and easy this was to create. The layers with different shades of greens, browns, and blues create a beautiful depth to my nature scene. Now I decided to keep my card with just the background and the sentiment strip, but you could pair this with stamped images or die-cut focal points. This is also a card design that would be easily mass produced and would be perfect for anyone who loves nature. Cat Scrappiness also has the Are We There Yet retro camper craft die, which I think would match perfectly with this background. I paired this card with a matching envelope by creating a single layer of the tree line on the bottom of a white envelope. I love how beautiful this card turned out. All the supplies that I used today in this video will be linked down in the description box. All of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Well, I hope you had fun watching today's video and got inspired. Please do click on the like button if you enjoyed watching the video. That really helps my channel. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe and wishing you all a very happy new year. Hello crafty friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we will be using a set of layering stencils along with a color combination that I personally have never tried before to create a very beautiful and impactful background, perfect for Valentine's Day, paired with a stunning sentiment which will also be the focal point for our card today. All the products that I've used in today's video are part of the latest To Be Loved release by Simon Says. Before we take a look at the card project, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to get notified every time I post a new video. For our background, we will be using the Funky Heart stencil, which is part of the latest release. Now, this is a love themed set which includes four 6x6 inch stencils, which creates a grid pattern along with the funky hearts that will be nestled into each of those grids. Now, the packaging here shows exactly how it would look when you layer all of the four stencils together, which is exactly what we will be doing for our card today. You could also use these stencils separate, wherein you could create only the grids or use just the heart stencils by themselves without any layering. But as our title suggests, we will be using all of the four stencils to create an impactful background. Here you'll see how beautifully these hearts nestle over each of these stencils. And well, both of those grid stencils also act as masks for each other. To ink blend over my background, I have an A2 size white note card, which I will be placing over the Simon Says Stamp sticky mat. This sticky mat will ensure that my cardstock stays in place while I ink blend through all of the four layers. For my colors, I will be using a beautiful pink and peach combination, which is something that I have never tried before. And I was really excited to work with these colors. I have carnation, watermelon, cheeky, and blush from the positively saturated ink line. I will get started with the first layer. I have the lighter shade of pink, which is carnation, and I will ink blend using this color onto each of those grid boxes. Now note that the sticky mat not just holds my cardstock in place, but also makes sure that my stencil doesn't move while I'm ink blending. Now this sticky mat comes with two acetate sheets, which are like the protective covering layer of on the sticky mat, which goes on the front and the back of the mat. I like to keep the acetate sheet on the back of this mat, which makes it easier to turn around the cardstock when I'm ink blending. This, I feel, gives a lot more control on the amount of ink that I put as compared to if the mat was stuck onto my work surface. Now, once I'm satisfied with the ink blending, I will carefully peel out the stencil, making sure that my cardstock remains in place. I like to hold on to one end of the cardstock. Here I'm holding on to one of those colored grids just so that I don't smudge any of that pink ink into the white grids. I will then carefully place the second grid stencil, making sure that I carefully line and mask all of those grid lines. And using cheeky shade, I ink blend onto the second stencil just like I did before. Now, usually when I'm working with shades of pink, I would either go with a green or a yellow combination. But this is the first time that I'm using peach tones. I feel that the pink peach color palette is a very delightful blend of the soft pink and the warm peach tones, perfect for creating an inviting and cheerful design. This palette definitely adds a touch of elegance and warmth to my project. Once I peel off the stencil, you can see how beautiful this background already looks. Now you could leave this background here and add a focal point and leave it right there. But we are creating a funky Valentine card project with those funky little hearts that will nestle themselves into these grids. Now let's move on to our third layer, which will be the heart layer. Now I will start with one of those pink grids. Now remember, I used carnation ink for my pink grid. This was a lighter shade of pink that I used. For my hearts, I will have the darkest shade, which is watermelon. I will ink blend it into each of these hearts, making sure that I have enough saturation of color so that the watermelon pink heart stands out against the light carnation pink grids. You could definitely play with the shades of colors here. You could use light, medium, and dark shades of pink or create an ombre effect for more depth and dimension on these hearts. But I'm creating a very simple and basic layering stencil background, so I kept the ink blending to the minimum with just one color for each layer of the stencil. Now, before I peel off the stencil, we will add some shine to these hearts. Since I wanted sparkle only on the hearts and not on the grids, I decided to leave the stencil on while I use my shimmer mist on this background. Once I've sprayed the entire panel, I will carefully peel out the stencil, making sure that the mist does not bleed into the grid. I will let all of that shimmer mist completely dry before adding the fourth layer of stencil. I did clean my sticky mat using a wet microfiber cloth before all that sparkle and glitter could dry. Now for the final layer of hearts, I will be using the darker shade of peach. Well, I'm not sure if you'd call it peach or orange, but this definitely is one of my favorite colors in the positively saturated ink line. It's called blush. Now, this is slightly darker than cheeky, which is what we use to ink blend on the grids. Once I was done ink blending on the hearts, I repeated the same shimmer mist spray on the layer on this layer as well. So basically, all the hearts you see on this background have shine and sparkle, while the grids have a more matted look. While my panel dries, I will work on my sentiment. I'm using the groovy Love You More word and shadow die, which again is part of the new To Be Loved release by Simon System. I really love the font on the sentiment. Now, whenever I'm adding a sentiment as the main focal point of my card, I not only want my sentiment to stand out, but also make sure that it doesn't cover my background. To add dimension to my sentiment, I went ahead and cut the words Love You More three times using some black cardstock. And then, using Barely Arts glue, I adhered all of these sentiment pieces together. Note that these sentiments come in small, tiny pieces. We have L, M, and Y. Then we have OVE for love, OU for you, OR, and E for more. All of these pieces are very easy to assemble to create a beautiful sentiment. Now, like I mentioned, even though this sentiment is a focal point of our card today, I didn't want to cover the entire background with it, also making sure that my sentiment stands out in front of that busy background. So instead of using a solid color cardstock, I used vellum for my shadow layer. Well, not only it adds backing to our sentiment, but it also makes sure that this beautiful background is not covered. Now that my background panel and the sentiment are ready, it's time to assemble them onto a card front. Using some double-sided foam tape, I adhered the background panel onto a top-folded A2 size white card base. Using some liquid glue, I adhered the sentiment onto the center of this panel. Now, it was at this point that I realized that I missed the heart on one of those grids. Well, this might be a mistake, but why not take advantage of that mistake? So what I did here was added three little heart sequins to cover up that grid, which not only covers my mistake, but also adds a touch of sequin love to my card. Using my Spectrum Noir glitter brush pen, I added sparkle on the sentiments as well. Now, since I layered up the sentiment, I love the dimensional look it has. You could also add tiny little foam squares to pop up your sentiment, but I feel adding layers gives it a cleaner look. Now, here's a look at the finished card. Well, not exactly finished. If you see the final pictures, you'll notice that I added some white gel pen markings around my hearts and the sentiment. I love how beautiful this project turned out. I'm really happy with the choice of colors, and I will definitely be using the pink and the peach palette for future projects. And I think this combination is absolutely beautiful and elegant for not just Valentine's Day cards, but also for so many different occasions. Well, thank you for joining me today. I hope you had fun watching today's video and got inspired. All the supplies that I used in today's video will be linked down in the description box below. Note that all of these links are affiliate links, which means that when you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. That really helps me a lot. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe. Hello, crafty friends, and welcome back to my channel. Well, sometimes having a card that says I'm sorry is exactly what you need, whether it's for someone who's going through a very difficult time or just a way to apologize to someone. I'm going to share a very clean and simple card project that do both these things, featuring the I'm Sorry wafer die from the latest To Be Loved release, paired with a beautiful floral focal point and an embossed background. Well, before we get started, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel. Your love really means a lot to me. Let us take a look at the products that I'll be using today. I have the I'm Sorry wafer die, which is from the latest To Be Loved release, And for my focal point, I will be using the Exotic Blooms wafer die, which is this beautiful floral image from a previous release, which was called To Love. Now, there are many products from both these releases which can be coordinated together to create beautiful card fronts and for other projects too. I will have links to both of these releases down in the description box below. Okay, so off camera, I went and die cut all of the floral images using some white cardstock. Now, whenever I'm having small, delicate die cut pieces, I like to use heavyweight cardstocks. Here I'm using the Nina 110 pound white color cardstock. So, well, you could also use colored cardstocks if you need, but I planned on ink blending on these. To add color to these flowers, I place them over the Simon System sticky mat, which will hold all of these tiny little pieces in place while I ink blend on them using my Simon System positively saturated inks. I kept the colors very fairly simple. I have my favorite combination of greens, which is pine and field for the leaves. I use the ocean shade, which is this beautiful teal color for the flower, and yellow citrine for the center stamen. Once I was done with all of the ink blending, I gently peeled off all of these pieces from the sticky mat and adhered them together using my liquid barely art glue. I did add a small piece of foam tape between the petals for some extra dimension on my flowers. I used the same exotic blooms die in one of my previous projects where I created a very clean and simple card with this beautiful floral focal point and a die cut sentiment which says adore you. I will leave a link to that video down in the description box below. Now that my focal point is ready, I was debating on whether to place this over a light gray cardstock or a white cardstock. Well, eventually I did use the white cardstock as my card background, but what do you think? Would it go better with the white or with the gray? Let me know in the comments down below. I took an A2 size white panel and cut it down to 4 by 5 and quarter, which is slightly smaller than an A2 size card base. This is something that I do for almost all of my projects where I like to have the slightest border showing up on my card fronts. Next, I went ahead and die cut the word I'm sorry using white cardstock. I cut the sentiment thrice, which will give me a beautiful dimension and make our sentiment pop. Don't forget to store those little dots over the eye. That is something I almost lose every time around my messy work area. Well, I adhered all of these pieces together using liquid glue. You could also use spray adhesives for such tiny little sentiment pieces or die cut the sentiments using cardstock stuck to adhesive sheets. But I like to use liquid glue because I feel that gives me a lot of control and even wiggle room to make sure that my sentiments are perfectly aligned over each other. Now, once I adhered all these layers together, I placed them back on my sticky mat and using the same ocean shade of the Simon System positively saturated inks, I ink blended on this die cut piece. I wanted to create an ombre effect, so I ink blended with a very heavy hand towards the bottom of the sentiment, and as I went up, I used very little pressure. Now, the sentiment matches perfectly with our flowers. Now, even though I mentioned that we are creating a very clean and simple card, well, we will definitely be adding some texture to this clean and simple look. I use the floral festoon embossing folder to add dimension and texture to our background panel. The intricate floral arrangement design on this embossing folder matched perfectly with the flowers on the exotic bloom wafer die, which is the focal point of our card. Now, whenever I'm embossing onto a background panel, I like to use a lightweight cardstock. Here I'm using the Nina 80 pound white cardstock, and I will lightly mist it with a spray of water to make sure that the paper does not crack when I run the sandwich through the die cutting machine. Now that all the components of our card is ready, it's time to assemble them together. I will first figure out the position of my sentiment and the focal point before adhering them onto the card front. Well, I did go ahead and cut a shadow layer for my sentiment using white cardstock. This is because I wanted to pop up the entire sentiment piece onto my card front using some foam tape. I first stuck my flowers using liquid glue on the upper left of this card panel, and then using some foam tape, I mounted the I'm sorry sentiment right below the floral focal point. I thought of adding some sequin mix onto this card front, but later decided to leave it as is and keep this card simple and not be distracted by any bling. Using some foam tape, I mounted the entire panel on top of an A2 size note card. I love that even with so much color and texture and dimension, this card looks absolutely clean and very simple, and it's easy to recreate in a bunch of different colors. And just like I did in my previous project where I created an Adore You card using the same floral focal point, you could use this design to create cards for multiple occasions. Here's a look at the finished card. I love how beautiful this turned out. I hope you enjoyed watching today's video as much as I did creating this card. All the supplies that I used in today's project will be linked down in the description box below. Note that all of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Thank you again for stopping by. Until next time, stay safe. Hello, crafty friends, and welcome back to my channel. We all need some healing hugs from time to time. My card project today is a very clean and simple white on white card, sending healing hugs to all you lovely people who need that extra love. Before we take a look at the card project, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to get notified every time I post a new video. I wanted to keep this card project very clean and simple with minimal supplies and, well, minimum color. I decided to use an embossing folder which not only had a beautiful textured pattern but also had enough space for me to stamp my sentiment because I didn't want to add any extra sentiment labels or any kind of extra sentiment strips. So here I am using the Fresh Daisies 3D embossing folder by Simon's Stamp, which I thought was absolutely perfect for the card that I was planning to create today. I took a white sheet of A2 size cardstock and applied a slight mist of water on the sheet of cardstock before placing it in the embossing folder and running it through the die cutting machine. The mist of water will loosen the fiber in the paper so that the paper does not crack while it passes through the die cutting machine. If you're using a lighter weight cardstock, you can avoid this step, but I would definitely suggest using a spray bottle on your cardstock if you're using anything heavier than a 100-pound cardstock. We'll take a look at that beautiful floral pattern that has been embossed on this piece of paper. I have a video where I used the same exact embossing folder and created something really beautiful and colorful. I will leave a link to that video down in the description box below. For my sentiment, I used the Greeting Mix stamp set, again by Simon's Stamp. This has a variety of different sentiments in beautiful fonts. I chose a sentiment that says healing hugs. I not only thought that the font on the sentiment is really beautiful and simple, but also the sentiment matches perfectly with the theme of our project today. You could also use this design to create thinking of you cards, sympathy cards, or even thank you cards. To stamp my sentiment, I used the Simon's Stamp Positively Saturated ink in the shade Earl, which is a very beautiful medium gray tone. Well, it does look like I have stamped the sentiment using a black ink, but once the ink dries up and settles down onto the paper, it definitely gives out that beautiful gray vibe, which matches perfectly with the white daisies. Now, this is why I love my saturated inks because not just for ink blending, this is absolutely beautiful when it comes to even stamping sentiments like these. I stamped this sentiment twice to give a more filled, solid look. Well, yes, I did say that we will be creating a white on white card, but I definitely love some color on my card project. I decided to use my Ohuhu alcohol marker in the yellow shade and lightly dabbed on the center of each of those flowers. Note that I'm not coloring here as I would usually do. Instead, I'm following the little tiny dots on the flower centers and just dabbing them using the tip of my alcohol markers. Now, if you wanted to create something a lot more colorful, then definitely go ahead and use your alcohol markers in bright blues and pinks and many other colors to create beautiful floral arrangement. This embossing folder pattern is also absolutely perfect if you use the blackout technique, which is a very popular technique using these 3D embossing folders. But here I will leave the centers just yellow and rest of the flowers white, and we will be placing it onto a white top folding A2 size card base. It's now time to assemble the card. I will use some foam tape to mount my embossed panel onto a top folding A2 size card base. I feel that the foam tape provides a lot more pop to all of those embossed patterns on our panel. Now, if you're someone who does not like dimension, you could use some liquid glue or double-sided tape to adhere this panel onto your card base. Next, for some shine and sparkle, on this very clean and simple card, I used Prism Positively Dazzling Gems and adhered them onto the card front using my Barely Art liquid glue. I like to use the funnel tray by Cat's Crappiness to hold all of these little gems in sequin mixes. This tray has a little spout on top, which makes it easy to pull all of these gems back into the container. And here's a look at the finished card. I love how beautiful this card turned out, and well, you could definitely recreate this design using any other embossing folder. And like I mentioned before, you could use this to create sympathy cards, thinking of you cards, thank you cards, and well, someone who likes it clean and simple, this could definitely also be a birthday card. I hope you had fun watching today's video and got inspired. All the supplies that I used in today's video will be linked down in the description box below. Note that all of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Well, thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe. Hello crafty friends and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a very fun and colorful floral card for you guys. I have used a beautiful fairy themed pixie dust stamp set by Simon Says Stamp, which was part of the latest To Be Loved release. This card is part of an Instagram hop hosted by Simon Says Stamp. I will leave details about the hop down in the description box below and also on my blog post. Before we get started, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to get notified every time I post a new video. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoy today's card project. Let us first take a look at the stamp set that I'll be using to create our card today. This is called the Pixie Dust Stamp. This is a 6 by 8 inch fairy garden themed stamp set which has some beautiful little clusters of mushroom intertwined with tiny little flowers, a large flower stem with 3 blooms, which is going to be the main focal point of our card today. We also have some additional elements which include little insects, loopy trails, twinkles, and more tiny mushrooms to add details to our whimsical fairy garden. This set also includes some beautiful sentiments like "You're magical," "Pixie hugs and kisses," "Life with you is a fairy tale," and "You sparkle and glow wherever you go." I love the font on these sentiments. As I mentioned, the large flower stem with the 3 blooms is going to be the focal point of our card. Off camera, I went ahead and stamped the focal point image along with the 3 charming fairies and those little tiny insects onto a white cardstock using my Memento black ink since I will be using my alcohol markers to color these images. Once I stamped the images, I used my brother's Canon card to cut out these images since I do not have the coordinating dies and I'm not very good with fussy cutting. Well, this set does come with coordinating dies, which will cut out all of these images beautifully. I'm using my Spectrum Noir Tri-Blend markers to color these images. Now, whenever I plan on shading on any of my stamped images, this is my go-to choice of color because each of this marker includes 3 blend shades that combine seamlessly for stunning depth and dimension. For my flowers, I will be using a beautiful bright orange and will be using all the 3 shades of orange. This single pen has a darker, medium, and a light tone orange. For the centers of my flowers, I have browns and yellows and greens for my leaves and stem. Well, here I have sped up the video, but if you'd like to see the coloring process in real time, I will be uploading a video very soon. Now, that video will be part of a new series which will be called the Real Time Coloring Series. Now, this will include all of my projects where I focus on coloring the focal points in real time. There will be no fast forward, so you can watch how I color each of these images to create beautiful focal points for my card projects. Well, not just focal points, but I will also be sharing how I use inks to create beautiful ink blended backgrounds, projects where I use watercolors, and well, my new latest favorite technique would be no line coloring. I will share all these fun coloring projects in real time coloring series playlist. Please note that none of these videos will have any voiceover or recording. These will be paired with some calming music that you can enjoy while you create your own crafty projects. Once I was done coloring the big, beautiful floral focal point, we will now move on to coloring our little fairies and all of the other elements that I will be adding to add detail to our card front. I kept the colors on these really simple since I wanted that big floral piece to be the main attraction of our card. Now that all the elements that need to go on the card front are ready, we will work on our card base. Now, if you notice that since I don't have coordinating dies for these images, you will see there is a white gap in between the flower and the stem. Now, well, at this point, I didn't want to pick up my scissors and do some kind of fuzzy cutting in between those leaves. I didn't want to spoil this beautiful, colorful image. So I decided to create a window card with a white background that would blend in easily with that white part on our stamped and colored image. I'm using a beautiful green cardstock to create my window. Well, since this floral image is pretty big, I did not want to create a shaker card because, well, the image would cover all of that shaker window and I thought it would be no point adding shaker bits into it. This is just to blend with the white on our white stamped image and with the background. I had to first determine the position of the floral focal point, making sure that I had enough space to add our little fairies on the card front. I held the floral image onto the window using some temporary tape and then added some foam tape to pop this entire image over the white panel. Well, this is at this point, if you choose to make it a shaker, then all you need to do is add some acetate sheet to create your shaker window and some beautiful gorgeous shaker sequin mixes inside the window. As you can see, I have added a lot of foam tape on the back of this window. This is because just in case I plan on mailing out this card to someone, I want to make sure it is held properly in the mail and does not bend between the foam tape gaps. The green panel here measures 5.5 by 4 1/4 inches, which is the size of a standard A2 size card base. Now, usually my front panels would be 4 by 5 1/4, but since this focal point was so large, I wanted to show the entire piece and not cut out any bits or parts of it on my finished card. Next, we will arrange the three fairies on our card front. Now, be it our focal point or any embellishments or any additional details that I add on my card front, I like to make it an odd number. That is the reason you will see three fairies here. And in terms of the detailing, I added two insects instead of adding all of the three insects that I colored, just to keep balance between the odd numbers. Well, for my first fairy, I used liquid glue, while for the others, I used tiny foam squares to give them a slight pop. I added both my little insects, again using liquid glue, diagonally opposite to each other. I stamped the sentiment Pixie Hugs and Kisses on a piece of black cardstock using Gina K white pigment ink and heat embossed using white embossing powder. Well, like always, I had to add some shine and glimmer on my card. I'm using my Spectrum Noir glitter brush pen and adding sparkle on the floral image and the wings of our little fairies. I then used my white gel pen and added some highlights on all of these colored images. I feel that these highlights add some extra dimension and color to our image and it definitely brings out the shine. Well, we do have a stamp for the trail, but I had already adhered this card panel onto a card base, so I didn't want to take any chances with my stamping. Instead, I created my own little trail using a black gel pen for our little insect. I then added some of the Prism Positively Dazzling Gems across this card front using liquid glue, and with that, our card was ready. Here's a look at the finished card. I love how gorgeous it turned out, a truly magical fairy themed garden. I had so much fun creating this card project. I hope you had fun watching it too. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I upload my video where I show real-time coloring of all of these images. Now, all the products that I've used in today's video will be linked down in the description box below. All of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Also, don't forget to check out my blog post where I will have more details about the Instagram hop, where we have some really talented designers showcasing products from the latest release by Simon System. Well, thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe. Hello, crafty friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we will be unboxing the Get YETI January 2025 cut kit by Simon Stamp and creating 5 different card projects using the pattern papers that are provided in the kit. Well, I will do a quick unboxing and then we can dive into our card projects. Usually, I would just create one card per video, but since we are almost towards the end of Jan, I wanted to share as many possible cards as I could using the contents in this beautiful kit. I decided to create 5 cards and show you how I use up the pattern papers in my card kit. These are really easy cards to put together. The best part about using contents of a card kit are that all of the contents coordinate with each other. So there's very little that you would need from your crafty stash, which may be like, say, colors or a couple of other dyes. Before we get started, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so that you get notified every time I post a new video. Before we start creating, let us first take a look at the Get YETI card kit. Well, I can't believe we are already at 2025 and I'm here unboxing the first card kit of the year. Now, this card kit consists of a very adorable stamp set, an embossing folder. We have a little coordinating die, some beautiful pattern papers, which I will be using to create our card projects today, and not one, not two, but 5 sheets of cardstocks. Let us first take a look at this beautiful 6x8 stamp set. This is the Get YETI stamp. Now, this one is perfect if you want to create beautiful wintry scenes featuring everyone's favorite mythical snow loving friend, our little Yeti. The stamp includes 2 cheerful Yeti images. We have a snowman, we have mountains, trees, a little cupcakes, cozy hot beverages, and some winter accessories and balloons, which would be perfect to create beautiful scenes on your card front. These would be ideal for your winter themed or holiday themed card projects. We also have a bunch of beautiful sentiments on this. We have happy birthday, there's nobody like you, get Yeti to celebrate your birthday, and so on. Now, the kit includes a small die set, which is the Get Yeti, and the balloon die set, which cuts out this little Yeti figure that is on the stamp. You can also find coordinating dies, which well is not part of the card kit but can be bought separately. Next, we have the illuminated Jack's embossing folder. This is a beautiful 3D embossing folder which will add a very playful and symmetrical pattern to your card panels. This has repeating images of the jacks from the classic game of jacks, featuring a starburst-like shape. Well, you could consider this also like snowflake patterns, which is what I will be using it for to create our winter themed card projects. I think this pattern would be perfect for blackout techniques as well. We also have a little Doodlebug Yeti sticker. All you have to do is peel out this little Yeti and stick it on your card projects. Well, it also says that this is dishwasher safe, so I'm assuming you could also add these on your coffee mugs or tumblers. I usually add these on my laptop. How would you add these stickers? Well, included in the kit is a little action wobble which you can use to pop up your little focal point images on your card front. Next, we have a sheet of the Simons Stamp Everyday Easy Sentiment Strips. These are the everyday sentiments that you could use on your card projects, which include "You're the best," "Thank you," "Happy birthday," "Here for you," "Love you," "Miss you." Well, Simons Stamp has coordinating dies for these easy sentiment strips. It's not part of the kit but can be bought separately. This makes my work so much more easier. Let's take a look at the pattern papers that are included in the kit. We have 12 double-sided sheets of Photoplay Yeti for Winter 6x6-inch pattern papers. Now that we have 2 sheets of each of those patterns, we don't have to sacrifice all of those beautiful images on the other side of the paper. These papers include adorable Yeti characters and playful symbols. All of these are in a cool wintry color scheme of blue, white, cream, and reds. The images include mountains, snowflakes, whimsical spirals, trees, hot cocoa, sleds, and Yetis, which perfectly coordinate with the images in the Get Yeti stamp set. I had so much fun using these pattern papers to create all of our cards today. Also included in the card kit is an A2 size envelope by Simon Says. This looks like it's in the navy blue color. For the cardstocks that are available in the kit, we have a beautiful red color cardstock and a light blue shade of cardstock. We also have two sheets of the Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock and a beautiful the silver holographic lava cardstock again by Simon Says. That was all the contents in the Simon Says January 2025 Get Yeti card kit. Now let's take a look at the cards that we will be creating using the contents of the kit. Off camera, I stamped all of these images from the Get Yeti stamp set onto Nina Solar White cardstock using my Memento black ink, and that's because I planned on using my alcohol markers to color all of these images. Once I stamped the images, I used the Brothers Scan and Cut machine to cut out all of these images since I didn't have the coordinating dies with me. And then I colored them using my Spectrum Noir tri-blend markers. Now, if you see the Yeti here, he has a small little slit in his hands that was created by the die that was part of the kit. You could add any of those little images in between his hands. You could add the little coffee mug, the cupcake, little balloon, or any of those tiny little images that we've stamped. I like to store all of these colored images in a container that is easily accessible when I need to create my focal point for the card front. For card number one, I will be using this pattern paper which has the Yeti image that says "Stay Cool." I will also be cutting out the strip which says "You are snow awesome," and that'll be the sentiment on our card front. I cut out all the elements, and before adhering them onto an A2 size card panel, I decided to add the beautiful embossed pattern using the illuminated Jack's embossing folder on my white panel. I love the texture that this embossing folder gives to my card panels. Well, using some foam tape, I adhered the main focal point onto the embossed panel. I cut the sentiment strip that says "You are snow awesome" so that I could fit it perfectly onto our card front. Using some liquid glue, I adhered these sentiments over the focal point image. We could then add this entire panel onto a top folding A2 size card base and we could call this card done. Now with all that texture and bump on the embossed panel, I would suggest using a strong liquid glue or some strong foam tape or double-sided tape to adhere this panel onto your card base. Now that was card number one for you guys. All I did here was cut out pieces of the pattern paper to create a beautiful card front. How easy and quick was that to create? Moving on to card number two, I will be using this beautiful, very light blue colored pattern paper with tiny snow-like markings on it. I cut a panel to be 4 by 5 and quarter, which is slightly smaller than an A2 size card base, and then I sandwiched this paper between my embossing folder and then ran it through my die cut machine. I love the texture on this card, especially with that little white snowflake splatters all over the panel. Now I wanted to create a snowbank effect so that I could add the little Yeti riding down the sled, which would be the focal point of this card. I used a white sheet of cardstock and used the hills die by Cat Scrappiness to create my hill. Well, this die cut gave me two hills, so I will be creating two cards simultaneously. I adhered one of those hills to my embossed background panel, and while the glue dried, I started to work on my third card, which again was very simple to assemble. For this card, I have this gorgeous pattern paper with the little trees and wintertime etched on it. I placed my hill slope and cut the entire panel to be 4 by 5 and quarter inches. I placed my focal point, which is this Yeti, which would be on the left hand corner of this card panel. I thought that I would turn this into a birthday card using the Get Yeti to Celebrate Your Birthday sentiment. Well, I thought instead of adding the balloons or coffee mug or any other accessory, it would be fun to add a tree between his hands that would be perfect as a birthday present. I then stamped the sentiment using VersaFine Onyx Black ink directly onto the snowbank, and then for the focal point, I added some foam tape, and well, with that, we can call this card done. Do note that since I had colored all of these images beforehand, it was really easy to create these card projects in very little time. If I were to create these cards individually and color and stamp those images one by one, it would have definitely taken me forever, and that would definitely be one card per video project. Moving back to our second card, now that the hill was completely dry, I went ahead and first stamped the sentiment which says, "Get a YETI for a great day," using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which I thought matched perfectly with the YETI sledding down the hill slope. And for this focal point, I used foam tape to pop him up. I also added little snowballs as accessories near my sentiment using some liquid glue. If you'd like to see me coloring all of these little images in real time, I will be uploading a video soon which will be part of the real time coloring series. Don't forget to check that out. I will leave a link to that series in the description box below. Moving on to card number 4, I wanted to create a little framed background. I started off with this beautiful plaid pattern paper, and here instead of using the Yetis, I decided to use the little snowman. Well, again, we will be creating a snowbank for our little frame scene. I used the frame die again by Cat Scrappiness to create my frame. Before adhering the snowman onto the card front, I stamped the sentiment which says, "There's nobody like you," onto the snowbank. Well, this card would be perfect for your friends or your buddies for this Valentine's. I then matted this frame onto the same light blue colored pattern paper before adhering it onto an A2 size card base. Well, that's the advantage of having two sheets of the same pattern paper. You're able to use it on two different card projects. I adhered the little snowman using some liquid glue. You could also use some foam tape to pop them up. I also added a little heart in between my snowmen. This is also part of the Get Yeti stamp set, which I stamped and cut using my brother's Scan and Cut. And I adhered it between the snowmen using liquid glue. And well, here's a look at the finished card. I definitely love how this card turned out, and I like the frame that the frame die gave to this card front. From the light blues and creams, let's move on to something bright and create our fifth and final card. This card includes layering up of pattern papers with a beautiful Yeti focal point and sentiment strip from the Simon Says stamp Everyday Easy Sentiment Strips. I started by cutting out a frame using the Cat Scrappiness frame die, which would be the base for my focal point. Now these are nested frame dies, so I took the next larger frame and die cut using a white piece of cardstock. This white panel will tone down all of that bright red from our card front. I use the illuminated Jack's embossing folder on my white panel to add some texture. Now all we have to do is layer all of these pieces together to create a beautiful card front. I cut the red pattern paper which has the coffee mugs on it to be 5 by 4 1 quarter, which is slightly smaller than an A2 size card base. Next, I adhered the embossed white panel onto this red sheet of pattern paper. My third layer is this beautiful striped pattern paper which reminds me of candy canes but with a hint of blue. I adhered this using some foam tape for an extra dimension. Now that all of my panels are adhered over one another, I will place my focal point, which is this cute and adorable little Yeti, towards the top of the striped panel. Now this is the die cut Yeti which has a slit in his hand. I will place a little heart between his hands. For my sentiment, I'm using the You Have a Kind Heart sentiment strip, which I die cut using the coordinating die from the Everyday Easy sentiment strip. I thought it would match perfectly with the heart in our Yeti's hand. I love to have such sets where one sheet of sentiments has so many different varieties of sentiments that I can use on my card fronts. Well, I matted the sentiment strip over a piece of black cardstock before placing it onto the panel. I also thought that the sentiment strip was way too white for this beautiful color on our background, so I used my red ink blending brush and lightly blended over the strip without adding any extra color to it. Here's a look at the finished card. I love how beautiful it turned out and how easy it was to create. All we did was layered a beautiful pattern paper and added a focal point and a little sentiment strip, and we could call this card done. Well, let us now take a closer look at all the 5 cards that we created today. I love how beautiful and unique all of these cards look. even though I have used the same set of pattern papers on and the same stamp set for all my focal points, all of these cards definitely look different and, well, so versatile. The coordinating sentiments for each of these cards are absolutely perfect. This could definitely be given as a pack of cards or maybe a set of cards to your loved ones as a gift. From simple layering up of pattern papers to beautiful embossed backgrounds, simple colored focal points, and beautiful coordinating sentiments. I love the variety of contents that are part of this January 2025 Get YETI card kit by Simon System. Well, I had so much fun creating all of these card projects, and I hope you had fun watching the video. All the supplies that I used in today's video will be linked down in the description box below. Note that all of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Well, I'm not sure if the January kit is still available, but all of the products are sold separately. So I'll be linking each of the products, not just what I used to create these cards, but also every content that was available in the kit. You can find the links down in the description box and also on my blog post. I will be back with another video, which will be part of the real-time coloring series where I show you how I colored all of these beautiful Yeti and snowman images. Stay tuned for that. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe. Hello crafty friends and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be stepping out of my comfort zone and sharing not one but four different masculine cards for you guys. Well, if you know me and you know my style of crafting, you'll know that I'm more of a floral kind of a girl. So creating masculine cards for me has always been one of the most difficult things to do. But today I will be creating four cards as part of my final assignment for level 2 of the Altenew Educator Certification Program. Now, they do have a couple of rules that I had to follow while I was creating these cards. I was asked to create four masculine cards, and we were given themes with birthday, love, or thinking of you, anniversary, and engagement. We were also asked to select any three components from our classes that we took in level 1 and 2. All of the classes had so many fun design ideas, tips and tricks, and beautiful color combinations. Well, for my cards today, I kept a basic color combination and minimalistic design and used very limited products to create my cards. Well, I did mix a little bit of floral design in one of those cards. I hope the guys don't mind. Before we get started, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so that you get notified every time I post a new video. Card number one is Love or Thinking of You card, and I thought this would be perfect with the stamp set that I'll be using to create this card. Well, I started by stamping the Sketchy Cities of America 2 stamp set, which shows the skyline of beautiful Seattle. Now, this was the very first stamp set that I purchased when I moved to Seattle, so it holds a very special place in my heart. Well, I'm not sure if this is still available in the store, but well, like I mentioned, this is a very special stamp and I had to use it in my final project. I stamped the skyline onto an A2 size white cardstock panel using clear embossing ink and added some white embossing powder over the stamped image. I then heat set this using my heat tool. Well, here's a small tip. When heat embossing on a cardstock panel, make sure that the heat gun is very hot, and I usually give it a minute or so for the heat gun to heat up before I bring it on my paper, especially when the image is so intricate. Also, don't focus all that heat in just one place. Make sure you move your heat gun around over the entire panel. This will ensure that the paper doesn't warp or bend. It's a little difficult to see here on camera, but I make sure that all of that powder is melted before I move on to ink blending onto this background. Well, here I'm doing an embossed resist technique for this panel. Over the embossed stamped image, I ink blended some beautiful blue shades of color. The best part about ink blending over embossed image is that the embossing powder will resist all of that color and the white embossed image will show through the beautiful color in the background. Once I was done ink blending, I took the panel and stamped my sentiment. This says, I'd climb the top of the Space Needle for you, which I thought matched perfectly not just with our Seattle skyline, but also with the theme of the card. Well, I love shine and sparkle on my cards. I try to use sequin mixes or metallic gold splatters, but with masculine cards, I had to get a little creative with my shines. So instead of using the usual metallic splatters, I added some watercolor splatters in black. I let this watercolor completely dry before I adhered it on top of my card base. Well, I love how this turned out. I did not ink all over the card panel, instead, just focused around my skyline, which I thought would be the main focal point of our card. I then cut this panel to be slightly smaller than a standard A2 size card panel and using some foam tape, I adhered this onto a top folding A2 size card base. I love how clean and simple this looks. Definitely something that I can mass produce with some fun colors. How about a rainbow colored background? Let me know what you think down in the comment section. Well, that was card number one, which was Thinking of You or Love themed, which I thought turned out absolutely beautiful. Now, keeping up with a clean and simple look, I created a floral masculine card. Now, this was definitely a bold idea. Not sure if the guys would appreciate florals or flowers on their cards, but I wanted to try something different. I started with this beautiful stamped image from Build a Flower Torch Garden stamp set. Now, the stamp set is a layering set with perfect layers to create a beautiful three-dimensional floral image. I used the third layer to create a more intricate detail on the flower and stamped and heat embossed it using gold embossing powder. Well, after I heat set the embossing powder, I allowed it to cool down for a couple of minutes before inking it up. If you don't let the panel cool down before ink blending, there are chances that you might smear the embossed image. While my panel was cooling down, I cut the floral image using a coordinating die onto a scrap piece of white cardstock. This created a stencil for my background. I could also use the solid layer in the floral image to stamp onto the heat embossed panel instead of ink blending. I used the same set of blues that I used in my first card to ink blend onto this floral image. I then used my nesting die to cut this panel to be slightly smaller than an A2 size card piece. I then heat embossed the sentiments which says "Be courageous and you're enough" from the Dainty Flower stamp set onto a strip of black cardstock using the same gold embossing powder. Like we did in our previous project, again for this card, I added some black watercolor splatters in the direction of our flower. This gives a flow to our focal point. Once the watercolor dried, I adhered these strips on either side of the floral focal point using some foam tape. Now, I like to use liquid glue on my foam tape that just gives a slight wiggle room to make sure that these sentiment strips are perfectly aligned. I also like to use my T-square rulers to align my sentiments. Well, I then went ahead and adhered this onto an A2 size card base. I love how easy this card was to create. One focal point with bright, vibrant color creates such a beautiful impact on your card front. I absolutely love this card. So that was card number two, the theme being encouragement, and I love how beautiful this card turned out. Moving on to card number three, where we will be creating a birthday card. Well, I must confess, the Cat Life stamp set is one of my favorites in my entire Altenew collection. Well, just take a look at the stamp set. How adorable are these little kitties? For this card, I will be using the trio of kitties from the Cat Life stamp set, which is this layering set that gives beautiful details on our cats. I stamped the image using black ink and then added layers with some light grays. There are layering stamps where you could color the bib and the bows on our cat, but I decided to leave it as is and not add any extra color since I wanted to keep the color scheme fairly similar on all four of my cards. Now, if you're someone who does not enjoy layering stamping, you could always use your alcohol markers to color in these cute and adorable cats. Now, once I was done stamping, I used the coordinating die to cut out the images. Also, using some scrap piece of cardstock, I cut the image two more times since that gives an extra strength to our die cut. You could do this also with your sentiment strips instead of adding just foam tape to add dimension and pop up your focal point or the sentiments. How cute and adorable are these little cats? I did layer them up, and this die cut has three die cut pieces layered over each other. Now, for my card background, I decided to add a navy blue cardstock which would ground the cats. I was initially planning to leave the background white, but later decided to add some pop of color behind our focal point. I used the same shades of blues that I used on all our cards. I wanted to give this a very confetti like feel, so I used the tiny bubble stencils behind my focal point image. I also very lightly ink blended using whatever ink was left over in my blending brush to give a depth to that tiny bubbles background. I then stamped the "Hope you have a perfect day" sentiment using black ink before I adhered the focal point over the front of our card panel. Even though we use three layers of die cuts for our cats, I love dimension on my cards. So I used foam tape to adhere my focal point as well. I cut the entire panel to be slightly smaller than a standard A2 size card base and mounted this onto a side folding A2 size note card. I love how clean and simple and how adorable this card turned out. Well, I would also add some sequin mixes or some gemstones just to add some shine. But, well, like I mentioned, I will be keeping all of my projects fairly clean and simple. So that was card number three for you guys, which was a birthday card. Moving on to card number four, which is an anniversary card. I used the same cat life stamp set for this card as well. I chose two cat images, which I thought would be perfect for this card. I stamped both these images using black ink, and using darker shades of gray, I added layers to our cats. Once I was done stamping, I used the coordinating dies to cut out these images. I also cut them out twice using scrap pieces of cardstocks and layered them over each other to create a more sturdy focal point. I love how cute and adorable these little kitties look. For my background, I wanted a very light, muted tone of blue, but with some extra texture. So I used the 3D Diamond Stars embossing folder for my background. I love the texture that this embossing folder gives to our panels. To add some grounding to our cats, I decided to use a white panel this time. I also went ahead and stamped my sentiment onto the strip of this white panel. As I was looking through my supplies for an anniversary card, I came across this beautiful sentiment from the 4 card stamp set which says, "Loved you once, love you still, always have, always will." I thought this was perfect for this card. I adhered this strip using some liquid glue, and well, since this is a textured base, I made sure that I kept something heavy on it, made sure that the glue was completely dry before adhering my focal point onto this card base. I then directly adhered these images onto the embossed panel. No dimension here. Once I was satisfied with the placements, I cut this panel to be slightly smaller than an A2 size card base, and well, I then adhered it using some foam tape onto an A2 size card base. Well, I did mention that I will not be adding any other color other than the color scheme of blues and grays, but I had to add a little bright red heart. The red heart does add a pop of color but does not move our eyes from the main focal point, and the cats still hold the main focus, and so does our color palette. I love how beautiful this card turned out. It is perfect not just for your anniversaries, it would also be a perfect card for your Valentine's and anything that you would want to give to your loved ones. So those were the 4 cards that I created as part of my AECP Level 2 assignment. I had so much fun creating these cards and sharing some fun stories with you guys. Well, all the supplies will be linked down in the description box below. Note that all the links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Also, a big thank you to all the creators at Altenew for all of these wonderful classes and tips and tricks and beautiful projects. Thank you all for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.